think that's pretty much it. We went over why you loved Overwatch and everything. Next up, we're going to be getting into Jordan's topic. Hit us with that topic, Jordan.
Hit you with that topic. My topic is I guess we're calling it the benefit of a reboot. And specifically, I wanted to talk about the fact that a lot of times when people mention reboots, and this goes not just for video games, but really any type of media in general, a lot of times when people talk about reboots, it's kind of with a sour attitude, and a lot of people just, as soon as they hear the word reboot or even remake, they just kind of like, they're automatically upset about it, and they're automatically kind of turned off. But at the same time, I think it can be really good, and the example that I brought up before the show was God of War, which we just saw at Sony's E3 press conference. And Jared, you made a good point that it's actually a soft reboot and not a full reboot, where they're kind of just rebooting the gameplay, but continuing the story.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that's a great example, because maybe you can have a reboot, but like you said, it's kind of soft. It's not fully rebooting everything back to square one, and so there's some things that need to go and that need to be cleaned up in the God of War series, and then there's some things that are still cool and that need to stay. So I think a soft reboot can be beneficial, and like I said, I think just reboots in general can be a good thing if they're handled correctly. Even like the Star Trek movies that they're about to have Beyond later on this summer, and yeah, I think that was great. Like, nobody gave a shit about Star Trek like 10 or 15 years ago, except for Trekkies, like people that obsess over it. So I think that there's a lot of examples of really good reboots, but I just feel like so often when I hear people talk about them, it's just with like a bad attitude. They're just automatically turned off whenever they hear the word reboot. So I want to hear you guys' thoughts on a good old-fashioned reboot.
So it's definitely situational, right? Like Last of Us, yep, port that shit over, right? Sleeping Dogs, Darksiders, why are we, Prototype, like you mentioned, Blessing, why? Just why? Mm-hmm. But it's tough.
But wouldn't those be more like
the remasters, not reboots?
Okay,
We're talking about
true.
reboots.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tomato, potato.
Tomato, potato, indeed. Yeah, so more like, like Force Awakens would be a reboot. God of War would be a reboot. DMC would be a reboot of the Devil May Cry series.
Resident Evil 7.
Like Actually, I guess that would be like a soft reboot, because they're changing it. It's like first person now and all that stuff, but I guess they are technically continuing the story.
Yeah.
I think for me, I'm a fan of video game reboots. I'm not really a fan of movie reboots, and that's because they're doing too many of them.
Independence Day,
like
Ghostbusters.
I was gonna say, do we really need a new Jungle Book? But apparently, it's good. And so maybe we do need a new Jungle Book.
Well, at least that's different. It's a cartoon movie turning into a live action movie. At least there's like justification there.
I would say that's more like a live action remake than a reboot. Yeah, because there's like they have the songs and stuff. Like, it really is kind of just a live action version of it.
Yeah.
I think reboots in games are welcomed because games are something that people are very much nostalgic for.
Yeah.
And so, like, if they rebooted Mario, right, and just made another 3D Mario, but it's all in like the style of Super Mario Brothers, like the original one, I would probably sell my apartment so I can get that game. Because I just thought of that, and that sounds amazing. But like, if they if they made a new Donkey Kong 64 and rebooted Donkey Kong 64, because I'm a huge Donkey Kong 64 fan, but like, video games are things that people are very, very nostalgic for, and they're different from movies in that you kind of dive into those worlds and you live in those worlds for a while, and being in those worlds is fun, and especially if that's a world that you've kind of been in before. There's something about it that's crazy. Like, I was playing Ratchet Clank a few months ago when it first came out, and the Ratchet Clank reboot or remake,
I would say it's a reboot.
Is that a reboot?
Yeah,
it's like both.
Yeah, it's different enough, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's definitely not a sequel. It's like the same. It's a reboot / remake of the first one, right?
Yeah.
And reimagining. Yeah, that's what they said. but it's basically the same game as the first one. And I remember playing the first one when I was like, I don't know, like in third or fourth grade, and playing this reboot was kind of crazy for me because they designed a lot of the levels the exact same. Like a lot of these levels are like the same layout, the same objectives, the same everything. And I would go into these levels and I'd be like, wow, I've been here before. And it was about 8 hours of that was like, it made Ratchet and Clank awesome for me. That it made that amazing for me, and I would love to do that for any game. Now, is it great for like younger people who haven't played the original games? I don't know, probably not. But for me, I welcome it, and I think it's cool.
The thing I think too is a lot of people get, like you're talking about with nostalgia. I think they get like nostalgia fog in their glasses, and a lot of times from a business perspective, if it's rebooting, it's for a reason. It's either A, it's been so dormant for so long that making a sequel doesn't really make sense, or it's the fact that people just didn't buy the sequels, you know? And the way a company looks at it is like, well, if you're not buying the next iterations in the story, let's just start over from scratch, and maybe if we retell it a different way and start over from square one and maybe course correct this ship towards where people actually want to buy the sequels. You know, I think a lot of times people are like, why are they rebooting this? It makes no sense, you know? But a lot of the times, too, people forget the original still exists, you know? The reboot doesn't get rid of the original. It's a big argument with Ghostbusters. Like, if the new Ghostbusters sucks, then it sucks. But you still have the original one, you know?
True.
It's not like the second Ghostbusters is that great anyways, you know? So it's like, I think people have this, like, weird nostalgia factor where they're like, the reboot will ruin it. No, the reboot still, the reboot won't do nothing. The old ones still exist. If anything, it's introducing people who, you know, the problem with old games is I appreciate old games, and I do try to play as many old games as I can. But a lot of times, to be completely honest with you, it's hard because it's hard looking at that few polygons. Like, sometimes it's hard to get over that barrier. Sometimes you have to mentally, you know, just get over that fact and realize that games aren't just about graphics. But a lot of times it is hard, with gameplay too. And with movies, a lot of times, a lot of old movies people think are good aren't as good as you remember them being. It's a nostalgia factor. It's that you watched them as a kid. So if somebody's rebooting a game or rebooting a movie, it's that kid's first time with that property. You're kind of selling that kid out of their own experience. You know? Who's to say the new Ghostbusters isn't a little kid's favorite Ghostbusters movie, and that makes them grow up to love Ghostbusters, you know? Who are you to tell them that they can't do that?
You're absolutely right, because I went into Independence Day, the original, was one of my favorite movies as a kid, right? I had the VHS, I watched it probably 100 times a year, right?
Yeah.
So when they announced this sequel...
Every 3 days?
Maybe, I mean, it's a bit of a hyperbole, but you know what I mean. I loved it. That and The Phantom Menace. That's my guilty whatevers. Yeah, I was a kid. So, and it was amazing to me, right? So when I hear about this sequel, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be fantastic. Like, I can't wait. It was absolute shit. And now, even when I go back and watch the original, I'm like, yeah, this movie kind of sucks too, really.
Well, Will Smith not being in that movie killed that movie.
Yeah.
To me. I had no reason to go watch that movie. I'm like, even if it was bad, if Will Smith was in it, at least I kind of see it being a sequel. Them not getting Will Smith seemed like a half step. It's like, all right, you have Jeff Goldblum. I like Jeff Goldblum, but that's not going to win me over. It's still not the Independence Day. Like I tweeted, I was like, an Independence Day movie without Will Smith isn't an Independence Day movie. So,
I think Jared, you and Blessing both kind of almost hit on the same point for me, which is that, Blessing, you mentioned that it's probably better for video games to be rebooted than movie or any other media, just because in my mind I was thinking like a game, for example, like you said, Jared, it's tougher going back to older games. So, you know, like for example, it may be tough for a kid, even if he was playing the PS2 remaster of Ratchet and Clank on PS3. I just played that game within the last year, and there's a lot of stuff, even though it's not that old. There's just a lot of antiquated gameplay mechanics in there that are tough to go back to. So I think, yeah, rebooting video games especially, just because of how much they've changed over the course of them being around, it helps because, yeah, it is tougher to go back to old games. Like, you know, I can go watch the original Star Wars trilogy all the time, remastered on Blu-ray, and yeah, the special effects aren't amazing, but it still looks great. And even if you remaster old, you know, NES or SNES games, they still, like you said, they feel old and it feels different. So that video game reboots may be more warranted in a way.
Well, also, you just made the point too, if you can go and watch all the original Star Wars trilogy, that'll still be way less than if you went and played an old video game. You know, It's a different time commitment. It's easier to go back and kind of wear through that oldness of a movie because it's an hour and a half to a 2 hour commitment, as opposed to a 10+ hour commitment to something that's just sometimes it's straining to go back and play an old game. You know, some games hold up, but a lot of the old games that are quote unquote classics, they don't. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Older movies hold up better than older games, I would say.
Yeah. Well, and also movies are a way older medium, you know? So it's like, yeah, I definitely think that reboots are necessary, and I think that people who hate on something before it even comes out, like, calm down, you know? Check yourself. Like, the thing you originally loved might not even be as good as you think it is, so chill. Take a step back.
Yeah. Like, even Jay-Z had a lyric where he was like, people want my old stuff, then buy my old album. And I think that
yep.
reigns true. Like if you really want the old Star Wars, then watch the old Star Wars. Like, they're not going anywhere. And I do think reboots are necessary. Now, there's one case which I wanted my topic was gonna be this, but I chose something else instead. But I was gonna talk about Mirror's Edge because Mirror's Edge Catalyst came out recently, and I guess it is technically a reboot. Or at least they said it was a reboot.
That's another confusing one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another confusing one. And Mirror's Edge Catalyst has a lot of issues. Yeah, Mirror's Edge Catalyst it's a reboot for a game that came out probably in like 2009, I think 2008. But it came out literally last generation, and so there's no reason to really reboot it because Mirror's Edge is not that old of a game. Like, they could easily make a sequel to Mirror's Edge. And I mean, it didn't do much as a reboot. Like, it didn't make that great of a leap in terms of graphics. The gameplay, in my opinion, is actually kind of worse. Some of the design choices were actually kind of worse. Like, they made it open world, which kind of made the game a little bit worse. And I don't know, like, I understand the idea of a bad egg could kind of spoil the bunch in terms of people's overall outlook of a series. Like, now the Mirror's Edge series has I won't say Mirror's Edge Catalyst is a bad game, but if it was a bad game, then I could say the Mirror's Edge series has one good game and one bad game. So it kind of averages out to an average game or whatever. But I mean, if you're thinking that way, you're thinking, I guess you care a little bit too much about sort of like the state of everybody else's opinion of a franchise you like, I guess. But I understand it a little bit from that perspective. And I guess what I'm saying is some reboots can be calmed down. Like, some developers can calm down on certain reboots. But if you're rebooting Super Mario Brothers in 3D, then bring it, because I'm down for it.
Down for that one. It seems like
I'm down for that one.
Kind of what you're getting at there is also the fact that, like, reboots can really hurt as well. Like, Mirror's Edge Catalyst, to me, due to the fact that it did get middling reviews and it wasn't a really big hit, at least so far, it might be kind of like the gravestone for that series, because are they really going to bring it back after they've already brought it back once? I mean, like, I think EA was already going out on a limb trying to, like, you know, get some fans back on their side, and I think that they kind of missed the mark, and so this may be, who knows, there could be another Mirror's Edge, but it might be the end of the series.
It's not necessarily the fault of the reboot, but it's like it's the fault of a bad entry into a series.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like, in terms of we mentioned this like a bit earlier, but like in terms of like the business aspect of a reboot, Prey it was announced at E3 at the Bethesda conference, and they announced sort of a Prey reboot instead of coming out with Prey 2, and that's because the original Prey came out like kind of way too long ago for them to come out with Prey 2 now, because like, who remembers what Prey 2 or what Prey was?
Yeah.
I don't even remember how Prey looks like.
I remember an owl.
So in that
white owl. That's all I remember.
I'm still waiting for Prey 2 beta access. Got that with a pre-order a couple years ago or something.
Oh man. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense business wise or marketing wise, because you can put out Prey 2 now, because it's just been too long. And so if you want to put in another entry into a series a bit further out than like what makes sense to, then you kind of have to reboot.
I also think, going to that point though, it just shows how Bethesda treats their properties and how EA does. I think Bethesda has a lot more care for their properties than EA does.